Peace, peace. How y'all? Oh man, it was beautiful talking to my bro. I hope y'all got to listen. I'm gonna go ahead and get into chapter 4 of Powernomics. I lost my page and I was chapter 4, restructuring schools for group competitiveness. Um, if you heard of Dr. Boyce Watkins, he's doing something. The Emancipation Equation 2. You need to go check that out. If you ain't doing anything at 8 o'clock that's going to help you create $50,000 or $100,000 a year. And I'm not telling you you're going to do this overnight because wealth isn't created overnight. It's created over time. You're going to get 2 years older anyway. You may as well become 2 years wealthier. Just a message, to words of wisdom from the wise. But listen, I love this man's information. And did y'all know that he created the first all black business school in modern day era? Like, y'all do know that we were like the first educators of all continents, literally. So I advise you to check that out. I don't care if you've been in business. It ain't nothing like getting some knowledge from our elders that have been in business 30, 40 years and got PhDs in finance, education, and business and are putting them to use. Not listening to someone that ain't actually putting it to use, just give you the information. Not just a transfer of information, helping you acquire the transformation. You feel me? Like, this is where we are. I'm looking for people that want to be economic soldiers. I'm going to be an economic soldier for our people because that's the least that I could do. That's how we got to give back. We got to stop thinking about our own selves and individualism. And I was telling my girl this, I call it nosotrosism. Nosotros means we and ism. You put it together. Working on my own vocabulary, create my own language. But no, I hope y'all laughing and enjoying. I'm gonna go ahead and get into the reading. Um, if you got any questions or you want to build on anything, you got any ideas, man, hit me up. This is what I'm here for. I'm with cooperative economics or ethno aggregation and vertical integration, as Dr. Claude tells us. So let's hop back into chapter 4. Restructuring schools for group competitiveness. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. He will find his proper place and stand in it. And that was from Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1933. The traditional role of schools for black children must be changed in order to make them functional and relevant in the lives of black Americans. Black schools must empower black children by functioning as extensions of the family, teaching the realities of life, dispensing knowledge, and honing skills. It is from these collective school experiences that black children learn to perceive the world and their place in it as individuals as well as members of a race of people. Schools have yet to perform these tasks. Changing black people, excuse me, changing black schools into what they should be will require major restructuring. Restructuring black schools will require more than just tinkering with a few programs. We will need our schools to produce children who are appropriately trained to implement the Powernomics plan in our communities, in our economic development, politics, and in our churches. Clearly, it will be necessary to make changes in what and how our children are taught. The new instructional programs and proposed solutions must be based upon the realistic needs and the socioeconomic problems of black children. Don't be laughing at me because I stutter. It happens. To be human is to err, so you're going to make mistakes, and I make a lot of them. So get your laugh on. But remember that readers are leaders, and we doing this to inspire and encourage others to rise to positions of leadership and economic empowerment for our own communities, as we were. Don't be laughing at me, baby. The new instructional programs, I said that, didn't I? If our problem is that our race inculcates values of individualism that hurt our people, then schools must design a solution to that problem. If our problem is that adults in our race feel successful only when they work in white corporations, then our schools must devise a solution and instill new values in the children. At the bottom line, we as black people must accept full responsibility for the quality of education our black children receive. There are a few, if any, incentives for the major society to operate black schools that prepare black children to compete in the economy. White society has a monopoly of control over the power of schools, and much of that power is hostile to our interests and opposed to our advancement. And this is a fact, y'all. Like, it's not a lie, it's a fact. Okay, next topic. Black America and its schools. Dr. Carter G. Woodson said In the miseducation of the Negro, blacks are the only group of people who take their most precious possessions, our children, and ask their oppressors to educate them and to mold and shape their minds. Today, blacks are totally dependent upon a major society to prepare black children to compete with white children. White control of black schools presents a conflict of interest for the majority white society whose primary interest is in its own children. As long as black people continue to wait on white society to educate their children, they will be waiting for a long time. They will be waiting forever. It's never happened. If you want Wakanda, we got to build it. And this is where we start. Black America must educate its children through community-based partnerships between students, teachers, parents, churches, and businesses. The same building principles that were useful in rebuilding our communities can be applied to schools, which are essential institutions and functional communities. Schools are also communities in and of themselves that should be built based upon a strong sense of community, trust, cooperation, and group accountability. When they naturally evolve into a community. When teachers, children, and parents work together toward group goals, they naturally evolve into a community of interest that they control. The design elements for education in the Powernomics plan are very purposeful. This chapter describes how to apply the Powernomics principles of ethno aggregation and vertical integration to education. This plan is intended to foster a love and respect for educational excellence and also provide a framework of self-discipline, a sense of community, and racial pride. Black power. Race first. This framework places a premium on cooperation and harmony and is intended to foster strong and productive alliances between black families, schools, businesses, public offices, civic institutions, and churches as we create them through Powernomics. More importantly, Powernomics creates an educational process that is specifically tailored to correct the historical weaknesses of our schools by linking them to a national economic and political empowerment plan. Next topic. What does Black America need from its schools? Any plan to empower Black America must have the involvement of Black schools to prepare the human or intellectual capital that we need to carry out the plan. Under the right circumstances, education can empower an individual or group by conveying knowledge, skills, values, culture, or attitudes. If we are going to effectively deal with this nation's structural inequality and the inappropriate behavior patterns of some blacks, then schools must accept the burden of producing the human capital we need to achieve these critical objectives. Otherwise, we will have the blind leading the blind. Nothing underscores racial inequality of power and wealth more than this nation's education system. The question is, how can schools that are underfunded and ill-equipped produce black children that are competitive with white children? We need an education model that meets and serves the specific needs of black children. The test of a model is whether it improves blacks to compete in political and economic marketplaces. Nothing more, nothing less. Empowering black children is more than teaching them math and reading skills. It is more than preparing them for public sector jobs or high-ranking positions in other people's businesses and other people's communities. They must know how to compete for wealth and power rather than poverty and acceptance to produce rather than consume. And to be job producers rather than job seekers. For schools, preparing Black America to compete means removing the chains of inappropriate behavior and teaching them to see, think, and behave anew. The classroom education must be relevant to the real world outside of the school, and black children should learn more in classrooms than they do on the streets. Black children need schools to teach them how to live a life and earn a living in an increasingly pluralistic and competitive world. Only when schools are able to perform these functions will they be able to close the learning gap between blacks and whites and other ethnic groups. A look at the traditional role of schools. Horace Mann, the architect of the common school system, ignored the existence of slavery and racism and described public education as the great equalizer. Mann was persuaded by the nature of the times to envision schools as institutions for whites. He felt that schools for the less privileged would provide them opportunities for social and economic advancement. Blacks eventually got access to public schools, but their treatment by the educational enterprise, which ignored their unique experiences and competitive needs, stands as a national disgrace. America's school system traditionally served as a major conduit for racism. It cooperated with social institutions to maintain the structural inequalities that predetermine black children's life chances. Today, schools have not fully committed themselves to providing black children a high quality and relevant education. Instead, Social scientists and politicians have devoted half a century to charging blacks with inferior intelligence and poor educational values. Historical facts debunk these charges as well as the claim that schools fail black children. Education is supposed to reward citizens for academic achievements based on the rule that the more education you have, the more wealth and money you gain. However, Figure 11 tracks economic and educational progress and reveals that there is practically no relationship between black people's level of wealth and income and their level of educational achievements. When we examine the educational accomplishments of blacks from the 1860s to the 1960s, we see some astounding accomplishments. Figure 11 also shows that in the early 1860s, approximately 98% of America's black population was illiterate by design. Following the Civil War, nearly 25 million European immigrants came to America with the same illiteracy as the black ex-slaves. Within the 30 years between emancipation and the Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896, blacks cut their literacy in half, reducing it from 98% to 48%. Blacks reduced their illiteracy twice as fast as the European immigrants. However, as European immigrants achieved educationally, they moved up in wealth, income, political empowerment, social acceptance, and business ownership. Blacks were on the bottom and stayed on the bottom. There was no direct relationship between their astounding educational achievements and benefits. Blacks did not receive increased incomes, upward mobility, or political empowerment in accord with their educational achievements. The reason for their lack of forward mobility is simple. Educational achievement by itself cannot override structural racism and make blacks politically and economically self-sufficient or competitive. This is true because education is a determiner of class, but does not transcend or eradicate racial boundaries for blacks. As indicated in Figure 11 above, the spectacular educational accomplishments of blacks did not translate into the same economic benefits as they did for Jews and other European immigrants before and after World War I. Jewish immigrants were coming into this country with illiteracy rates equal to blacks, but since they were not black, they were accepted into the banking, clothing, entertainment, and jewelry industries and professions. As they were being accepted, a national racial backlash moved across the country in opposition to black people. In the South, members of the majority society burned black farmers' crops, poisoned their animals, poured kerosene on their farm crops, and lynched at least one black man per day. Their nearly impossible educational achievements did not change black status in terms of power, wealth, and upward mobility. It just bothered me that a lot of people don't even realize, we so-called have been integrated for about 50 years? But for 400 or 500 years, all of the things that we achieved and overcame or went through, not that I'm saying we got to be paid for that. I think that we are owed something, but we're going to be the ones that have to give us what we're owed. You know what I mean? But it just bothered me that a lot of people really don't see that a lot really has not changed. This illusion of freedom, how free are you when you work with your coworkers and they getting bonuses and you outperform them, and you've been outperforming them since day one? But they getting the bonuses. They moving up. You know what I mean? And they don't even have to work as hard as you and do the type of work that you do. I'm going to let the book do the speaking, because I can say a lot of stuff and I don't want to just give you my opinion. I want you to come to your own conclusion. This man didn't just come to his own conclusion. He actually did the research, and he got artifacts. Well, he got places of reference. You can go and check this stuff out for yourself. But if you just look around, think about it. You see a little Chinatown. You're going to see a little Irish, a little Poland, and all of that. You know what I mean? But you don't see no black businesses building. And I ain't talking about one here, one little restaurant. What's a restaurant when our competitors got banks? They got hospitals. You understand what I'm saying? Even the Bank of Puerto Rico, you said? There's even the Bank of Puerto Rico. You know what I mean? We got to start doing for ourselves. And I don't mean individually. We keep thinking individually. I heard people talk about, why are you worried about what the next person spending their income tax money on? Well, that income tax money, remember, that was money you already earned that the government decided to give you back that they already collected interest on. Let's get that out of the way. They took some of your bread, made money off of it, and returned it to you. Let's put that out there. Number one. Number two, the reason is because we keep thinking individually. You keep thinking about looking fly. Fuck looking fly. It's not about looking fly anymore, man. It's about being fly here in your mind, being articulate and being able to use this like a weapon. You watch the movie Black Panther. You want to see Wakanda, but you don't want to go buy no shirt that say I support black business, or you don't want to go to the African Heritage Food Co-op, or you don't want to be a member of the UNIA, which organized the government for all Pan-Africans, so that we have a structure to fall under. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm not trying to get under nobody's skin. What I'm saying is we are all we got. They ain't never gave us what they have allowed other immigrant groups to have. So the only way to get it is if we take it by force. And I don't mean we got to kill nobody or none of that. I'm saying come together. We the smartest people on the planet. I'm going to tell you if ain't nobody else told you. We the smartest people on the planet. We the smartest people of all time. And we will always be. Let's put it together. Because we got the most buying power. Because we got the most influence. Because of our direct relation to who we are in the universe. So what I'm saying to you is take heed to these words and teach this to the babies. Because the babies are going to be the economical soldiers. So, did I say economical? I don't know. Don't worry about it. I make up words. This is what I do. This is what I do. I hope you get some laughs. Let's continue to build. Okay. Where was I at? Do you know? Even as late as the early 1950s, census data indicated that a white high school graduate earned more than a black college graduate. A black person earned only 54 cents for every dollar a white person earned. The largest number of blacks ever entered in college and government service following the black civil rights movement in the 1960s. Blacks earned income went as high as 67 cents for every dollar that whites earned in the mid-70s before falling back down, to 56 cents in the 1980s. Income has remained relatively unchanged, even though the price and cost of living goes up for everything, right? Nearly a half a century after the civil rights movement began, blacks' earned income is back to where it was in the 1950s. Our income is equivalent to what it was in the 1950s in 2018. Do you see what that means? Like we still at the bottom. That looking good stuff means nothing. You'll go and buy all the Jordans in the world, but you won't buy one stock of $80-something of Nike. One stock. It don't take nothing to open a brokerage account. Just because you don't know the word don't mean you can't open up a dictionary and look, or ask somebody that knows. I don't know everything, and I ain't gonna give you no stock. Tell you to invest in this stock and that stock. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just let you see, like, we got the ability and the freedom to create our own future. Stop doing this mediocre stuff, man. Stop being a consumer. We buy everybody else stuff. It's time for everybody to buy from us because we the best. We the best producers. We the best creators. We the best, period. And it's time for us to show that. So, where was I? Okay, education is yet to offer the same economic or wealth rewards to blacks that it does to whites. Unfortunately, many black leaders, just like whites, tend to believe that the legacies of centuries of slavery, Jim Crow, semi-slavery, and benign neglect policies ended in the 70s. They didn't just end there. Even with increasing evidence that integration has failed, they continue to believe that integration in and of itself wiped the racial slate clean. It never did. They believe all ethnic and racial groups started out even in the 70s, and therefore, if black people are suffering inequalities, they are due to the differences in natural talents. Not at all. It is naive of black and white leadership to believe that 4 centuries, not to mention the 2,000 years of enslavement in sub-Saharan Africa, where was I? That 4 centuries of racial exploitation, oppression, and denial of education opportunities, not to mention lynching, torturing, raping, beating, castrating. Yeah, us, our people, our forefathers and mothers. This is how they were treated, and we were never compensated on that at all. Never. And the people that were compensated on that never went through that. Ever. We the only people here that did. Wealth and other inequalities continue primarily because the planned inferior education provided to blacks was never designed to give them the countervailing power to offset the racism to which they would be exposed in mainstream society. Education is not enough. Since education was not designed to eradicate wealth and other inequalities between the races, were the descendants of slaves wrong and wanted an education? No, they were not wrong. It's just that education was not, and to this day is not enough. The majority society knew this during Reconstruction when they elected to deny black ex-slaves 40 acres and a mule like we were promised that we never received, ever, and we want was due, and give them a marginal education instead. Education is an empowerment tool only when it is used in the right sequence. Black people were given no choice but to focus on social and education rights rather than economic rights. In capitalistic democracy, however, economic achievement and mobility must occur before a group attempts to open up channels of educational opportunities. Educational achievements then engender a corresponding set of cultural values and a further appreciation for educational achievement. Education allows a group to consolidate and extend its economic gains in the marketplaces. When Jewish immigrants began immigration into this country in the latter part of the 19th century, they first established an economic base. Fortunately, they entered the country with some skills that were needed in America's emerging industries. They were able to capture these industries based more on cultural experiences and chance than on educational achievements. After succeeding in these industries, they used their acquired wealth, political clout, and social acceptance to enter and begin dominating education. If blacks are going to eliminate the myths about why they have not achieved, they must understand that structural racism forced black Americans to lift themselves in reverse by putting education and social goals before economics. Though blacks demonstrated spectacular educational achievement and a total willingness to be long suffering, they could not translate those educational achievements into economic gains. There is practically no inherent economic power associated with educational achievement. Black America has encouraged its children to get a good education and find a good job in a white corporation or some level of government. Most ethnics, especially Jews and Asians, encourage their children to get a good education, develop some on the job experience, then use their education to start their own businesses. And that's what we need to do. We need to develop our businesses all out, all over. You know what I mean? And support them. You know what I mean? If you know that they got it over here and it might cost $1 more, okay, it's $1 more. You're gonna spend that bread anyway. You may as well spend it with your people. Circulate that bread amongst our own, so that we can develop our own, and we ain't gotta go to nobody else. Where was I? There are few black businesses in which black children can use their educational skills. As stated earlier, clearly a fundamental change is needed in the role that schools play in the lives of black people. Who are schools failing? One of the most frequently heard complaints in the closing years of the 20th century was that schools were failing. If public schools are failing, they are failing only whites, Asians, Hispanics, and other ethnic immigrants. Schools do not now, nor did they ever, fail in what they were designed to do for black children. They were designed to create a labor class in service to white society. Schools have always been mirrors that reflect the values, goals, needs, and priorities of the society and the communities they serve. They have remained almost exclusively controlled by whites through government policymakers, boards of education, and major corporations. These powerful bodies approve curricula, staffing, and instructional materials. Regardless of their physical location, racial, or ethnic makeup, schools across America had to teach their children European American values. The quality of teaching and the educational outcomes track the racial lines of power and wealth. The academic scores of elementary and secondary schools strongly correlate with parental income, wealth, and education. High income students can more easily afford special coaching from parents, professional remedial help, and private schools. Schools perpetuate wealth and racial advantages that are intergenerational in nature. Schools produce in their students whatever skills, attitudes, or other characteristics public policymakers and business owners need in their present and future workforce. Following the Civil War, for example, the country needed an industrial labor force. President Lincoln signed a national immigration law in the early 1860s that encouraged migration from Europe, Asia, and Spanish-speaking countries. So America's first public schools following the Civil War were established to educate the influx of immigrants to become leaders of industry, business owners, professionals, and members of the managerial classes. Ignored by Lincoln, blacks were never educated to be owners, managers, or members of the intellectual class. They were educated to be the workforce for those overclasses. And that's true. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't free the slaves. It just fired them as slaves. He didn't care about us. And a lot of people don't believe that. There's a lot of people celebrating St. Patrick today. I hope y'all saw the video from the African History Network, I believe that it is, because it touched on why you shouldn't be celebrating that if you have African heritage in your bloodline. The Powernomics Education Plan. The Powernomics Education Plan calls for a total restructuring of schools in black neighborhoods. Like an assembly line that is producing an outdated and non-competitive product, the educational assembly lines with black communities need to be shut down and re-engineered to address the collective needs of the children in their communities. Black children come to schools bearing different burdens, experiences, and needs. They are entitled to an education program that addresses who and what they are. The same is true with the black community. They too have goals and ambitions for their children. Both the needs of the students and the goals of the adults ought to be reflected in the National Education Plan. This plan should dovetail with what Black America wants to achieve and where it wants to go. Since the primary purpose of education is to be the great equalizer, restructuring the educational experiences of black children to promote their competitiveness in all areas of society is the goal of Powernomics Plan for Self-Empowerment. Once the goals of the education plan have been accepted by black communities, black educators have the responsibility of modifying school curriculum, instructional materials, teaching methods, extracurricular activities, administration, community-based activities, school-parent relationships, and even professional services with the specific intent of bringing educational parity to black children. The driver of the reform steps that are offered below is a firm belief that black-dominated schools and educators can rise to the challenge and play an essential role in the economic and political reform of black America by the year 2005. Obviously, that's 13 years ago, like I said in one of my other bills. I just found out about the book not like 2 weeks ago, you know what I mean? A lot of people in my circle do read books, but don't really talk about what books they read. And a lot of them aren't actually reading books based on facts. They may be reading books that are more like stories. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. More like stories. They're not reading stuff that actually deals with facts and where we need to go as a people. They're not dealing with stuff that's teaching them. When you go to school, when they teach you about us as a history, they start off in slavery. But we was here tens of thousands of years before that. We was on every part of the continent, every part of the world before any of this. We ruled the world for thousands of years. Okay? And they don't want you to know that, because when you find out that you from the greatest DNA on earth, y'all can go ahead and speak. It's okay. I got a loud voice. I think they can hear me. Then you know what you're dealing with. Then you know what you're capable of. You know what I mean? A lot of you doubt yourself because we've been trained somewhat to not believe in ourselves, not trust one another, and we need to get back to that sense of peoplehood, like Dr. Claude Anderson states. Okay. Education reform number 1. Halt school integration. School integration has failed and should be stopped. Even though halting school integration would surely be celebrated by social conservatives, black America has little choice. The pain of school integration is borne almost completely by black Americans. The majority white society has not been required to give blacks anything they did not already have. They profited while blacks bore the pain. School integration ought to be halted for the following reasons. First, the original intent of the Clarendon County SC lawsuit in 1953 was for parity in the allocation of education funding. Under a separate but equal public policy, blacks wanted to stop the local board of education from giving white schools 4 times as much money as they allocated to black schools. Blacks were more concerned about the equal than separate. Blacks were more concerned about the equal than the separate. Second, the U.S. Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education ruling that segregated schools were inherently inferior and unequal was wrong. They are unequal when they are unequally supported. Instead of integrating and using black students into white schools, the Supreme Court should have ordered the Board of Education to bust more money, better instructional materials, better trained staffs, and new equipment in the black schools. Third, Research studies conducted in Norfolk, Virginia in 1995 and other school districts revealed that black children are not performing significantly better in integrated schools than they were in all black schools. Moreover, some schools showed either no progress or in some instances academic achievement gaps that were widening rather than closing. Just a fun fact for you. Did you know that children that have racial pride actually do better in school, specifically African Americans? When you know who you are and where you come from and what you're capable of, you will do much better in school. Fourth, integration made by black people guests. Fourth, integration made black people guests in America. Integration has been used to justify closing black schools, firing black teachers and administrators, busing black children, assigning massive numbers of black children to special aging classes, special education classes, and depriving black children of the advantage of being a majority population. Finally, in 1991, the U.S. Supreme Court, in its Board of Education of Oklahoma versus Dow decision, ruled that school districts could halt integration efforts. Thus, for the first time in history, black Americans are free to return to local control and fashion their own education plan and policies. Education reform number 2. Control public and independent schools. Since 1977, the U.S. Supreme Court has issued a number of rulings that blacks can now use to regain control of public and private schools within communities that serve their children. These schools must be restructured, the mission, curricula, budgets, and teachers to serve the immediate economic ends of those who control it. Without that control, blacks cannot direct or use schools for their own purposes. How does a community get control of its schools? Many majority black urban areas provide instructive case studies in the types of problems blacks will encounter as they seek more control over their schools, especially public schools. Detroit is an example. Detroit was a leader in locally controlled schools in the 1960s. The movement that started there spread across the nation. Now, Detroit is leading a change in the opposite direction. White control of black schools and their students. Detroit is a majority black community with a black student body, black mayor, black dominated city council, and elected black school board. Local control should have meant black local control. However, as is often the case, it did not. In January 1999, Michigan's white governor, John Engler, proposed that Detroit public schools with a 98% black student enrollment be taken out of the hands of the elected local school board and transferred to one appointed by the mayor. The governor also proposed that the mayor appoint a representative to the Detroit School Board who would have the power to override and veto any actions. This political maneuver essentially transferred control of the Board of Education from the electorate to the governor and the mayor of the city. As expected, once this transfer of power took place, the governor appointed a white representative to oversee the predominantly black Board of Education. Now, you know what's crazy about that? You know that all over Detroit right now, the Arab community has pretty much taken over. You know what I mean? And like they said, I know it was something about receivership. I ain't going to get all into that. But if you're from Buffalo, New York, the brother John Washington got all the information you need on gentrification, receivership, and all of that. Because that's what they're trying to do all over the state of New York now. They're trying to take that exact same thing that they're doing in Detroit and do it here in New York. Have you noticed any parents? I don't know if you go to school for your children. Nowadays, especially like in grammar school, when you go, you can't just show up and say, you're taking your child out today. No, you can't. You got to literally like call and make an appointment. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. And y'all see what happened to the young lady last year, or maybe it was the year before? She was teaching her, matter of fact, it was last year, I think. She was homeschooling her children, and she was being punished by this justice system because she was homeschooling her children. Y'all not even teaching them how to be competitive in today's age or for tomorrow. So who are you? Who gonna care more about our own children than we are? You know what I mean? What was the purpose in Detroit, for example? What was the purpose of bringing a mayor in to get a white representative to oversee every? Get out of here. At every point in time when we're trying to move up and do something right and positive and powerful to empower us as a people, we got the majority society coming at us from all angles. This is why we need to respect and love one another a lot more. We need to be more forgiving and more open to one another as a people. We got to get back. You see this, man? I don't care what place you came from. If your skin look like this, the police gonna treat you like you one of us. And not just them. The justice system gonna treat you the same way. The structurally racist businesses that you go to apply for jobs, they're gonna treat you the same way. Know that I know a lot of people that are doing what they need to do at work, and they're not being compensated equally as their peers who don't even perform as well as them. I know this is a fact. I've experienced it, and I know tons of people that have been working in certain fields for 10, 20 years that really, even though they're getting paid and they're comfortable with what they're getting paid, they deserve more, and they deserve exactly what their counterparts are being paid who do less work and don't even outperform them. That's crazy. You know what I mean? You want the best. I want the best of everything. You know what I mean? If I was in business, I want the best. It really wouldn't matter with your color, but for us and for this topic right here, it do matter. I want the best. I don't want, you know what I mean, just anybody that's coming to try to sabotage and take over what we start. And we got to stop letting people come in between us. A lot of times these, I think they call them Sambos or Uncle Toms. We allow them to come in. And y'all know who I'm talking about. You got all these potholes around the city of Buffalo, and you see all of this property being sold to people that never came from these communities, probably never even lived here. You could go to any other city right now, and you can probably find all of the housing that wasn't sold at their, yearly auction. But you can't do that here in Buffalo, New York. Nope. They're gonna tell you got to go and find whoever the owner is, yada yada. They're not gonna give you no help with it. But you could buy some of the land. You could buy some of the empty lots. You know what I mean? You could buy that. But they're gonna get all of that land or all them properties. They're gonna make sure that all of these feeder immigrant groups got access to that. Do y'all remember Harmonia, Sweet Street, Low Pier? Yeah, I'm 40-year-old man. I lived over there. Yeah, it don't look like it did when we grew up at all. I don't got nothing against those people, but my point is they got access to that before us. And we the ones that's been paying taxes. We the ones that's been living over here. You know what I mean? And not just there. I noticed that they started to knock down the Perrys, and I believe they're gonna knock all of the Perrys down, and they're gonna add on to the Buffalo Creek Casino. Man, listen, you better off playing around with the stocks, man. You know what I mean? Spending that money, giving them people that bread. Let's get back to the subject matter at hand. What was I talking about? I talked about that. Okay. Whether the schools are predominantly white or black, located in an urban inner city or not, they are always under the control of whites. So while parents in non-black communities are getting more control over their schools, black communities are losing it. Whites have control of black schools, whether they take over public institutions or establish underfunded charter schools, a voucher system, or implement similar conservative concepts. While charter schools can be developed to advance Powernomics principles, at present most charter schools are underfunded and lack the support and ancillary services that they need to be successful. They compete with and undermine public schools. Whether it is vouchers or charter schools, black parents will try these new education strategies, seeking options for their children and beguiled by the promise of a few dollars, which are insufficient to provide a complete education. Within the next few years, it is not difficult to project that social conservatives who argue for tax cuts and options that divert funds away from public school will successfully destroy or at least severely cripple the public school system. These growing trends contribute to the loss of control blacks have over their educational systems. How can blacks exercise more control over institutions within their own residential neighborhoods as they rebuild them into communities? It will not be through civil rights, equal opportunity, or social integration. All have failed blacks. Control must begin by using Supreme Court decisions to gain control of the money that supports schools. The old adage that he who pays the piper names the tune still applies. All states assign substantial powers to local school boards. The bulk of school funding comes from the local communities and not from the federal and state governments. Since black communities pay taxes, they must have the greatest say in how their schools operate. Like white communities, they should control their schools. Otherwise, there is a reason to question whether blacks should collectively withhold payment of those taxes that support a school system that they cannot locally control. that they cannot control locally. Today, white government agencies and corporations are intensifying their economic control over black schools and using them to benefit members of the majority society. Across America, corporations are taking over black schools under the guise of supporting the voucher system, charter schools, and privatizing public services. The real prize, however, is the more than $100 billion that is spent annually in urban school districts for building construction, school supplies, textbooks, food services, testing programs, and internet infrastructure and services. The profit motive remains king in the corporate world, and the black education system are the prizes. They are sought after prizes not necessarily because they have the largest budgets, but rather because their money is an easy target. They do not face significant internal competition from black people, nor do they encounter cumbersome or restrictive procurement standards. Corporations use many tactics to pry open the black community for their own benefit, and the techniques are much the same regardless of the particular area they target. A frequent technique is to hire a credible black person as the interface. The interface gets a nice salary, and the company gets a direct pipeline into the source of profit they seek, which in this case is the schools. Because blacks have such a weak sense of community, it is sometimes hard to deconstruct those opportunities to find a catch. If blacks are going to control schools, they must recapture funding. It is the state's responsibility to fund schools, but control is a local decision. By following the money, blacks can take conservative programs and use them to their own advantage. They can set up special independent schools, whether they are charter schools, religious schools, or a private academy. They can make this trend a positive one and set up schools to take care of the needs of their own people. Through political activism, blacks could require that new monetary controls be established that would track the funds allocated for each student. This per student expenditure should follow the student whether inside or outside the public school system. It should include all other money governmental entities put into the system for management, school supplies, construction, and special programs for direct and indirect support of education. Without the additional direct and indirect per student funding, the vouchers would not provide sufficient funds to operate charter schools. The schools would have to charge tuition and seek additional public and private funds. Therefore, any community that seeks to establish a charter, religious, or private independent school system must insist that all per student funding follow each student from the public schools into the new school. Otherwise, blacks should continue to support the public schools. I think I'm gonna stop here, and the reason I'm gonna stop is because this looks like a long chapter. 101, 115. I'm gonna stop here because I've been talking for a while, and it's been 45 minutes. When we was in grammar school, your class is 45 minutes. I ain't the best teacher, but at the end of the day, I just know what's important, and I'm just trying to get it out to the people. I hope you enjoyed the build. If you haven't bought your I Support Black Business t-shirt, please look on my business page on Facebook at Homebasedbusiness.solutions, or you can come to my page, Omnipotent Costner, and just scroll down, and click. Even if you just buy one, I appreciate it. You know what I mean? And maybe we'll do something. Maybe I'll just run this out and see who purchases it and knows. Maybe I'll give them a little something for the summer. You know what I mean? Well, I hope you enjoyed the build. If you got any questions or if there's any other books that you want me to read, now I got 4 that's coming up. I'm gonna finish The Race First, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I got to get into I love this book because it's awesome. I like it. Think and Grow Rich. The New Jim Crow. I'm gonna get into that too. And I ain't gonna finish. I'm gonna finish Rebels Against Slavery because we got to teach the babies. This stuff that I learned about Rebels Against Slavery. What's funny is, I learned this in prison. This was like the 3rd book I ever read in my life, and it talked about history that wasn't taught to me in school. They started our history in school as being slaves. Like literally, they started our history being slaves, but they never talked about where we came from and what we were practicing. You know what I mean? They never talked about that. So this book, Rebels Against Slavery by the McKissacks, that is something that every child, every black child needs to read that book, or at least their parents need to read it to them. You can read 1 chapter a day. They only like 5-6 pages. It's a beautiful read, and it's going to tell you some information that you didn't know. Do you know who Denmark Vesey is? Toussaint Louverture, the Seminoles, You know what I mean? Do you know who was that one guy? His name was John Wild or something like that. You know my name, John. So I was looking at that like, well, sound like me. But nah. Y'all have a great day. I'm gonna throw some more bills on here. Um, if you got any ideas or whatever, put it in the line and hit me in the email or what have you. Info@homebasedbusiness.solutions. Peace. Have a great day and a great weekend.